Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Adobe Live. We're nearing the end of the year over here in the stream, and I feel quite sad that we're, wrapping up this year, but at the same time, looking forward to a fresh start. We're just talking about this here. And we're here again with the D&AD partnership with some phenomenal guests from the industry, the creative industry in general, chatting to you guys at home. So thanks for tuning in. Before we start, a big thank you to all of you who, always turn up to the streams. We're on Behance, so come and join if you're on YouTube. I'll be tracking the chat and passing on questions to our guest today. And our guest is Rob Baker. Rob, how are you?
I'm very well. Good morning from a kind of grey New so good afternoon. Yeah, so it's morning. It's 9 a.m. in New York, and
there you go.
It's trying to break through, but not quite. So really happy to be here.
Nice to have you as well. Looking forward to the session. It's going to be really interesting because we're talking about a new industry that we haven't really touched on the stream here. So some really great insights. We already chatted yesterday, and I'm looking forward to what you'll share. So do you want to kickstart and tell us a bit more about what you do and who you are?
Sure. So I'm Rob Baker. I'm Director of Marketing and Creative Strategy at MoMA. I was supposed to do this presentation in May, physically in London, and obviously COVID saw to that. And I think since then, I've really thought about 3 or 4 times about different ways in which I would think about this question or kind of what I would talk about. So today I'm going to talk
too much time.
I know.
This.
Well, it's kind of COVID just threw in loads of kind of curved balls in terms of how we think about the museum. So it's like, actually, how will I frame this? So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of me today, and then a little bit about MoMA, but mainly talk about kind of the work of my team and how we're kind of responding to this moment. So just an intro to me. So kind of a long time ago, I graduated in philosophy, an incredibly useful degree to work in the creative industries. I worked a bunch of advertising and communications agencies, but really started to work in the arts in about 2007. So my first kind of big role, let's see if I can do this, was at the Barbican Centre. So for those of you that don't know the Barbican, it is supposedly the largest multi-arts and conference centre in Europe. They present a phenomenal programme that covers kind of visual arts, performing arts, incredibly experimental in what they do. But they have an amazing visual arts programme. So they have a real focus on architecture, design, fashion, photography. And that's what really got me into, I guess, working within a kind of visual arts kind of gallery context. So, and this is an image from our digital revolution, which seems like a long time ago now. And I think when we were talking about digital revolution, it felt like the future, and obviously it is the present now. But that was one of our big shows, which was really looking at kind of digital innovation within the visual arts.
And were you drawn to some specific? I'm already interrupting you, Rob. Sorry.
Yeah, no, please do encourage that.
Good. Okay, great. But were you kind of drawn to a specific, field in the visual arts? Was it, photography? And especially, I'm personally interested because being at Adobe, we're always covering quite a broad spectrum of visual arts, and we're talking about creativity. And was it photography that got you started into this museum world, or was what drew you to it?
I think probably my introduction through working at the Barbican gave me a very particular kind of route into kind of the gallery world. So the Barbican doesn't have a collection, but it has a very particular focus. So it focuses very specifically on architecture, and they use their space to showcase that, and photography, and really thinking more probably from a design perspective than a kind of art perspective. So I think perhaps my introduction to kind of galleries, my curiosity really came through, I guess, more design than what we would consider conventional or more classical fine art. So I would say that was my interest, but I guess I quickly moved on. So I was there, and I went on to join Tate, which is a slightly more traditional kind of art gallery in terms of the range of art it presents. So I joined in 2014, And probably one of my biggest projects there was the expansion of Tate Modern. So I'm sure many of your kind of viewers know that Tate comprises of 4 galleries in the UK, the biggest of which is Tate Modern in London, and kind of the biggest kind of job I had to do during my time there was launch this expansion. And this is an amazing image. So we commissioned Peter Saville to basically, when Tate Modern was in a kind of construction site, we commissioned him to, we asked him to say, could you create us an image that we can use that kind of captures the spirit of the new Tate Modern? And this was the image that he came up with, and it was this idea of kind of, vibrancy, color, transparency, this idea of public space. So this is one of the really exciting kind of outputs of that, but was a great project to work on.
I was reading a little bit more about that as well, and the whole project around the silhouette and how it was meant to be appreciated from, all these different angles and from different directions. And it really had a distinctive kind of profile every way you looked at it. So there was such an interesting concept around it. Yeah,
he created it on, I don't actually know the bit of software, but basically he took the architectural plans from Herzog and de Meuron, put them into this piece of software, and basically recreated Tate Modern, and you could basically view it, colored it, and then you could view it from any angle. So this is the kind of lead angle that we chose, because you could kind of see the new bit, but actually you could view it from any angle, and created the most wonderful kind of graphic forms, and was really beautiful, actually, a really lovely project.
Yeah. It was great, yeah, and there seems to be a theme with extensions as well, wherever you work. So we'll talk a bit more about that.
Well, I'll go on to it. So I think I got like maybe a reputation for kind of opening expansions and museums. So in 2017, I was invited to join MoMA, and I'll talk a little bit about MoMA, if that's okay, just to give kind of viewers a little bit of an introduction to the museum, because it's got such an amazing history. So it was founded in kind of 1929 by these 3 amazing women. So Mary Quinn Sullivan, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, and Lily P. Bliss. And I love that their first brochure, I have to read this quote actually. The first brochure that introduced MoMA it says, "New York alone among the great capitals of the world lacks a public gallery where the works of the founders and masters of the modern schools can be seen." And I just love that idea that actually before this time, there was just a complete kind of lack of familiarity with artists like Picasso, Van Gogh, and it just seems so ingrained in history now. But actually in 1929 in New York, that just knowledge didn't exist. So I wanted to show you just a couple of images. These were from our very first exhibition. So this was in an apartment building, an apartment in Fifth Avenue. And I just love the way in which it's presented. It's like, you've got an artwork on a door, you've got an artwork below an air handling unit. I think this next image,
whichever works.
Like, I know you've
the couch as well.
We'll just put it above the couch, and I just love the kind of informality of it. I just have this vision of them not really knowing how it will be received, and just like placing the artwork around. So
and look at where it is now. Isn't that amazing? I
know. And I should say, actually, we have on our website, we have a history and a documentation of every single exhibition that's been at MoMA. So you can go and explore kind of every single show, and they have installation shots, the first press release. But that's where this came from. So the first director of MoMA was a guy called Alfred Barr. And we use this quote a lot to kind of articulate, in some ways, the vision of MoMA as a kind of public institution. So the Museum of Modern Art is a laboratory. In its experiments, the public is invited to participate. And I think that that sense of discovering something new, but having the public as a kind of central component of that has remained true. And this illustration, hopefully you can see some of the detail, but this was drawn to really communicate the range of things that MoMA does. And what I love is that MoMA was one of the first I think the first museum actually to collect art, photography and also motion picture, and to treat them as a fine art form. So his vision was about really thinking broadly about how we define art.
And I think this vision is something that we were talking about it yesterday, but you've really managed to keep close to your heart as you've grown and become, this iconic museum. But, you have, I was reading about your creativity lab, and you really create those spaces for everyone to really physically participate. And I guess in this time of 2020, it's taken a whole new shape, but participation has been really important to you, and in telling different stories that aren't necessarily singular. So there are different perspectives that are welcome, and you're also a little bit challenged, I feel, going to MoMA, no?
I think that's right. I mean, certainly, yeah, as you touched on. So we have a creativity lab in the museum. We have spaces for participation for kids. So I think certainly particularly since our reopening, I think there's been a real focus on a kind of two-way sense of dialogue on participation, and less about MoMA kind of communicating kind of a master narrative of what modern art is. So I think we're still a kind of education institution. We were founded as an education institution, so learning is really important. But I think particularly now more than ever, this idea of kind of multiple perspectives and multiple points of view, quite right. And that's a real focus for us. But interestingly, as part of BAR's vision, this idea of collecting design, kind of industrial architecture. So all of these things are really important to present a really holistic view of art. So this is our kind of vision today. So the Museum of Modern Art is a place that fuels creativity, ignites minds, and provides inspiration. So this very much touches on this idea of a kind of space for inspiration and a space for the public to really participate and play a key role in the experience. I'm losing my voice today. Excuse me.
It's the morning.
I know it's the morning. It's 9 a.m. So as I said, I joined MoMA in 2017, and I was invited to co-lead something called the Creative Team. So at MoMA before, and this is perhaps true of most institutions and probably most organizations, there were kind of individual siloed departments of like digital product or digital media, marketing, design, content, PR. And the vision here, which wasn't entirely my vision, it was a vision that I stepped into but fully was very excited about, was this idea of a different kind of team, one that works with kind of lots of disciplines coming together to think about new ways in which we can engage with audiences and with the public, but also to think about a kind of digital future that actually we needed to be prepared for a kind of museum that could exist both kind of physically and virtually. And there was something a little bit around, for me, this idea that, what we consider to be conventional marketing and what we consider to be content, kind of those definitions are really blurring, and actually audiences have a more sophisticated relationship with brands, and they want to have content and information that is delivered with integrity. They don't like being sold to, and particularly for a museum, that was really important.
And I was going to ask you a little bit more about this kind of digital transformation, because I always find it really interesting as also a buzzword that a lot of of us are adopting in the past years. And something that is really challenging I've seen in businesses and brands is is purpose. So do you often kind of step back and look at your experience and your user journey and think, is this overcomplicating or facilitating the user or the visitor kind of experiencing the MoMA, or this visit might look very different this year or in the future. So what are digital experiences for you, and I guess how has this boomed this year?
I think we're always trying to simplify what we do for the user. I think there is always a tendency for, particularly, I guess, in the museum space, to think about kind of technology first and platforms first. And I think we've been really good recently about thinking about what are we offering the user that is of value, and how do we kind of support a kind of visitor journey. So I think probably this past year, we've thought very carefully around which I'll talk about a little bit further actually, but how we present our exhibition program virtually in a way that is interesting to audiences. So, we haven't necessarily thought about creating a kind of virtual walk around of a physical space, because actually quite often the technology involved in that means you spend more time navigating the technology than experiencing the art. Yeah. So I think we're very careful to think about actually how, if we're going to create a digital product or we're going to produce a piece of digital content, is it useful to our audience, and does it add value, and is it a good experience? So we think really carefully about that, and partly because it's also can be a really expensive process that doesn't necessarily add value. So we think quite carefully about that. I just wanted to say here that I co-lead this team, and this is also incredibly unique. So Leah Dickerman, who is director of content and editorial strategy. So we are kind of brother and sister, if you like, within MoMA. And actually this idea of bringing me, who comes with a more kind of maybe commercial or marketing background, and she was formerly a senior curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at MoMA. And we were brought together, coming at it from very different perspectives, but finding new ways and new models. So it's been an incredibly kind of fruitful and interesting experience for me to actually work with her and collaborate together. So I just wanted to share just a few things that we kind of immediately did, and I'm still kind of back in 2017 and just talking about as a team some of the things that we did to think kind of some of our initial outputs, I guess. So this is going to play, hopefully. So this is we wanted to work as one of our projects on our identity. So if we're thinking about a kind of digital first brand, our identity system was kind of rooted in the physical. And I'm sure a lot of people that are kind of watching this probably know more about the MoMA identity system than I am, because it's quite an established one, but it was founded or launched in the 1960s and has gone through kind of various iterations and developments. And we looked at it in 2018, partly to think about kind of how it moves, making sure that it feels contemporary. It has a Gothic font, and I think we have to work hard to make that feel fresh and exciting, which I think we achieved, but also to think about how it moves and how it exists within a digital universe. So we work with an agency called Order in New York, and an emotion agency called Pet Rally to develop our system. As you were saying, Emma, we really thought carefully about some of our digital products. This is MoMA.org, which is our kind of main interface, digital interface, proprietary interface, and really thought carefully about how we apply identity to that, but also create a really simple, clear user experience, and a website that has to do, in many ways, a lot of things. It has to, obviously, it sells tickets, it promotes the program, but we see it very much as a kind of a program platform. It houses a lot of information, a lot of really great content. So creating a great user experience for that. And then probably one of our kind of biggest changes is to create a kind of editorial platform that exists on MoMA.org. So we launched magazine about 18 months ago, and this is kind of the fruition of a bigger strategy to put content at the center of our kind of creative and marketing strategy. So we are obviously on all of the kind of main social media platforms, and we were producing content for that, but we had content on Medium, we had content on a blog, and we really wanted to create a kind of single hub that could house kind of all of our content in a really coherent way. So this includes video, podcast. I'll come on a little bit to talk about the virtual views program of our exhibitions, and really great editorial. And this was a real kind of focus for us, which I think, as we'll talk about, kind of coming into COVID, when the entire museum output went from being kind of digital, but mainly analog, and an experience of coming to the museum, to only being available virtually. I think the launch of this kind of held us in pretty good stead to kind of, you know, support that and have an engagement with audiences
I'm
during closure.
That you were very prepared, actually, from what you said, you know, already when you joined the team, that you already had this vision of, you know, bringing a more of a digital experience, and for that to really blend in with your physical kind of experience. And there's something really interesting in that as well, that, you know, a lot of museums, but also I think us at Adobe, we're seeing this digital space as allowing us to reach a lot more people and, you know, speak to everyone over the world in an experience that is usually quite exclusive. So if you removed being able to going to New York, which is, you know, I think going to the MoMA is an iconic moment of visiting New York, you know, you are still able to experience that and reach, you know, a lot of visitors across the world.
I think that's certainly true, and certainly all of our digital products are predominantly, I would say, international in their following. So we do have a very very international audience there. But I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit, kind of since kind of lockdown and COVID, and I would say that we were still predominantly. So I think a lot of our digital platforms were supporting a kind of physical experience, and I think kind of COVID has made us think about actually those things potentially need to exist much more in parallel. But no question, it enables us to reach audiences that we wouldn't normally be able to reach. And there's also something, I mean, I think from a kind of audience development perspective, that actually the barrier of coming into a museum, I guess, be it geographically or in terms of people that are new to coming to museums, there's something about the digital space that removes that kind of threshold to coming into the museum. So there are certain bits of content that really work successfully in actually pulling people into our program that perhaps have either never been to MoMA or never been to New York, and that's fine. And we really, you know, really great that we can have those kind of engagements. So I think I'll talk about that a little bit further, because we can go through some of the projects that we've launched since COVID. But I just wanted to share kind of this idea of kind of editorializing kind of the work that we do and thinking about how we can say something with a bit of meaning. So this is actually an advertising campaign. So we 2 years ago, we had 3 relatively kind of unknown to a broad audience women of color. We're presenting them as main exhibitions or commissions within MoMA. And so it's Tania Bruguera that you see here, Cuban artist, Tarsila de Amaral, Brazilian artist, and Adrian Piper, African-American artist, and relatively unknown. And we went through a process of thinking about how do we kind of communicate a bit of the essence of these artists that in a way that can A, have impact, and B, communicate something strong and powerful about kind of these women and their position and their art. And we came and settled on this campaign, which is partly about communicating kind of their vision, but also communicating something of the values that we hold very dear at MoMA. So this was a campaign that ran digitally, but ran physically as well. So this is the New York Times, ran across the subway in New York. But Tania chose this quote of the idea of dignity has no nationality, which we thought was an incredibly powerful quote. Tarsila de Amaral, so she's since passed, but working with her estate, I am what I am effortlessly. And Adrian Piper, and this is something that she chose very specifically. Imagine what it's like to be them. So this idea of otherness, if you like. So just a little bit of an example of actually, you know, we can obviously do a lot of kind of editorial work within a very specific content platform, but actually we can actually translate that through to some of our advertising and communications that we do as a team as well. This is, excuse me, this is New MoMA. So this opened in where are we now? We're in 2020. This opened in 2019. As we touched on, so I came from an expansion of one museum to move into the expansion of another, which actually is a very different kind of museum. And this expansion created 30% more exhibition space. You can see actually just on the left-hand side, the top space that looks in dark is a performance studio, which you can look out to from New York. And this expansion was masterminded by an architectural design practice called Diller, Scafidio and Renfro. They've done lots of projects. They are currently constructing one of the V&A East buildings, I believe. And they're pretty famous for kind of masterminding the High Line in New York. So a kind of quintessential New York architecture practice. And so we opened last year. Obviously, we created a much better building, an expanded building, but also gave us an opportunity to present a different kind of curatorial vision. And I'm going to hand over to, if we can have the first video, please.
I think for MoMA, there are lots of ambitions for the collection. One of them is to try to do away with the idea that the permanent collection is permanent, but rather that it's something that lives and breathes, that's constantly changing. I think it's a responsibility of the collection and the display to really respond to the time that we live in, to the conditions in which we live every day. That's what we can do. We can bring this collection out and mix it and remix it so that it's constantly responding to the world around us. We know that there are people who come because they are dying to see those Warhol soup cans. So this isn't a question of kind of moving those pictures to the side. It's a question of introducing new neighbors to them. The new MoMA will show paintings and photographs and films and drawings and prints side by side and let them tell their stories to each other in ways they haven't before.
That was Sarah Suzuki, who is our Deputy Director for Curatorial Affairs, just talking a little bit around a kind of new curatorial vision and this idea, I guess, a couple of things. One is to tell a much more international story. So I think kind of historically, MoMA's collection strategy was much more focused on a kind of Western European, North American view of what modern art is. And I think, you know, a focus in collecting and is manifesting in the museum now is a much more international view and is reflected in our exhibitions and the artwork you can see. But also this idea that we were collecting all of these different types of art, be it photography, architecture, design, painting, sculpture. But they were quite often in our previous buildings separated. So we would have the design and architecture in one place, photography here, the painting and sculpture here. And it was kind of against the kind of philosophy, the kind of Bauhaus philosophy of MoMA, that these disciplines interact and talk to each other and were being produced at the same time. And quite often these artists were moving across disciplines. So the new MoMA was really about kind of bringing those things together again and saying that they can be in dialogue with each other. So that's really kind of the vision of MoMA. I just wanted to share actually one more kind of content example, just prior to getting to us to March 13th, which is when we closed for lockdown. So so when we were thinking about the opening of MoMA, we wanted to think about how we could bring artists kind of into that story. And we commissioned an artist, Canadian artist called Sarah Swiner, who you see here. So she works with photography, collage, she's a bookmaker. And we invited her to make a comment on the opening of the expanded MoMA. So we asked her to produce a series of, I can't remember whether we actually left the brief even more open than that. I think we asked her to make some films that we would host on our Instagram platform. We gave her full access to our collection.
What a luxury!
I know. So she could kind of dig around and think about how she would use it. And we gave her almost no kind of editorial guardrails. And I guess this is just an example of kind of how we want to be kind of working with artists to kind of respond to things that we do, but to use them in a kind of communications platform, as well as obviously within our program. So if I could ask for this video to be played, please.
Okay, listen. I just want to say a true thing. The politics of value is a politics of knowledge. The sense of one's place and one's sense of belonging is closely connected with the idea that this is not for us. You become a voluntary subject of those ideas. Consider, for instance, the ways in which the space of the Modern Art Gallery presents the visitor with nothing less than an iconographic program and a master historical narrative. By walking through the museum, the visitor will be prompted to internalize the values and beliefs written into the script. Art history, which claims to account for these objects and their changes over time. In terms of art, the Baroque image really gets closest to the actual arrangement of the world. There is stuff everywhere. Things that go without saying because they come without saying. Value and price have become completely unyoked, okay? A lexicon of forms and colors. You never look at me from the place I see you.
So I love the idea of saying there's stuff everywhere. So I think she was in this particular one. It's worth actually going onto our Instagram and listening to them all, but just a commentary on actually kind of your experience of going into the museum and kind of the values that are communicated kind of subconsciously is I think quite an interesting idea. So on March the 13th, like most museums, we closed a little bit before we were told we had to close, because we felt we needed to protect our staff and our visitors. We closed on March the 13th, and as I mentioned, it was kind of this moment where, you know, the whole kind of program then became something that had to be virtual. And I would say we probably were relatively kind of well set up, but I mean, that was really a fluke. No one could have imagined that we would be closing. And indeed, this was 6 months after we had just reopened. So the new museum was only open for 6 months before we had to close again. And it's raised, I think, lots of kind of questions for us of kind of how we work with our curatorial colleagues to deliver a kind of vision for the program during closure. So I just wanted to talk through just some content examples of how we've done that and really how it will probably shape how we work kind of in the future, at least for the kind of short to medium term. So one of the first things that we did was establish what we called virtual views. And this was a program that really looked at what we had physically in the space, kind of recognizing that no visitors were going to be able to experience that, and really try and transfer that to a kind of virtual or online experience. So here are just some examples. We pretty much covered off most of the kind of exhibitions within our space during lockdown. But, you know, they included, we always would do a kind of live Zoom conversation, either with an artist or with a curator, to really kind of elucidate some of the kind of ideas and concepts within the exhibition. Neri Oxman, for those of you who aren't familiar with her, she is an architect at MIT Media Lab. We have a show currently, I think it's still on, pretty sure it's still on, called Material Ecology, which is a kind of fascinating exhibition around how we can think about new kind of collaborations with nature to think about design and architecture in the future. And I have to say, kind of, I obviously went to the exhibition, which is a fabulous exhibition, but actually listening to Neri talk within a Q&A context, seeing some of the films, was actually a really additional help for me, who is reasonably familiar with her, to actually kind of understand kind of some of the concepts and thinking behind kind of her practice and the show as well. So virtual views played a really kind of important role in us being able to communicate kind of.
And I saw you had a Starry Night virtual views event as well, and a Q&A with the curator, as you said. And it's really interesting to see that, you know, digital and distancing at the moment is also bringing experiences tighter and closer. Like you said, it's actually adding also a value that we couldn't quite have before. So it's a really interesting piece, I think, in, you know, the really empowering museums to show that their, you know, access to knowledge and education is still important during 2020 and is still able to happen, and just in a different way we didn't quite expect. Or
yeah, totally. And I think I mean, I think candidly, I think people are missing kind of physical encounters with art and being in the museum. And certainly we've seen kind of the joy of, we've reopened for now a couple of months, and the joy of that. But I certainly think, these channels have offered ways for audiences to connect with art. But even, candidly, we're still thinking about kind of, what will the future look like here? I think we went through a period of, everyone being on Zoom, everyone experiencing something through their screen. And I suppose we need to think about, actually, is that always going to be something that is interesting to viewers? And actually, will they want to go beyond a kind of Zoom Q&A? So
and there's a fatigue, right? As well, in terms of, streaming and watching this. And I'm with you as well in terms of, as working for Adobe or being on the other side of, as a viewer, I'm also thinking, we're consuming a lot of content, and how does this content stand out, or what value does it bring again? So, you were saying this yesterday as well, with being opened again, suddenly you can have visitors in the MoMA and they're experiencing a very exclusive experience.
So we reopened, I think, at the end of August. Wow. And the governor kind of said maximum 25% occupancy, and we, in an abundance of caution, opened at just 100 visitors an hour, which is a real fraction of the visitors that we would normally welcome at the museum. So for those that came during that period, and even now, it's a pretty phenomenal experience. You're kind of, looking at Starry Night almost by yourself. Actually, probably not Starry Night. Most people gravitate to Starry Night, but most other galleries, you have the artworks almost entirely to yourself. So it's a great experience. But we're eager to welcome more visitors. Just one of the other things that we not too far, is introduced, just, I guess, not only kind of contact with kind of artworks, but also contact with artists and critics. We've got a critic in the lineup here with Alice. But really having an opportunity. So this is something that ran through our Instagram platform, and the kind of premise of it was, wouldn't it be interesting to find out what kind of artists are doing in this moment? So finding out a little bit about kind of their practice, and introducing them quite often to audiences, but also finding out about how they're working within COVID and what, how they're responding to that. And we've seen some great ones, like Arthur Jaffa, like he's in his car actually doing the interview, and it's a great kind of, immediate thing that you can actually just connect with an artist on a kind of Wednesday afternoon and get to hear about what they're doing and what they're up to. It's kind of just connects you a little bit. I think we all appreciate that we're kind of by ourselves, or at that point by ourselves at home, and it's just quite nice to know that kind of everyone is like that, and artists are like that, and how are they responding to that. And then just finally, just one final content example was, I think, by creating a kind of editorial platform, we were able to, and so this is a little bit ties into, I guess, the title of this presentation, which is this idea of beyond the exhibition. And I think a content platform has the ability to respond much more quickly to moments like this, and to collaborate with artists in a very dynamic way. So, a couple of examples here with Tourmaline, who's a Black trans artist. We were able to share her film kind of through MoMA magazine, and Wolfgang Tillmans, who I'm sure many of you know, is also a musician, and had produced this track called I think the full line is On My Own But Never Alone. And we thought, God, that was just a perfect piece of content to release at this precise moment, and that was accompanied by Q&A. I think I just have one more actually to share, and just thinking about, I guess, when we were talking about things that I guess are relevant or people actually want to see, one of the most successful things that we did was actually work with our film curatorial department to kind of sort through all of the content that was available on kind of common kind of streaming platforms, and actually provide some recommendations. So the greatest films you've never seen, kind of what to watch when you're stuck at home. Our architecture and design curatorial department did a whole list of films, great films to watch that feature architecture. And our kind of education team did the same thing with films for kids that we think are really great and valuable. So this just gave us a bit of an insight as we think about kind of the future, just thinking about kind of other ways in which, so rather than necessarily just presenting things that we have at the museum, just working with our curatorial colleagues to find ways to add value to people's lives that link to some of our curatorial departments.
You're actually creating new content. You just said this actually links to other departments. I'm always really interested to seeing how, internal teams have been able to bounce back from this year and actually work together differently, and, to create new content or to partner up in a time where everyone's role is kind of changing and adapting constantly. And, you're staying by the news every day. That might mean someone sitting in another team will be doing something completely different tomorrow. So how has that worked? And do you feel that you were nimble enough to, create all of this with a plan that makes kind of sense in a time that's so uncertain?
I think reasonably nimble, I would say. I think probably one of the biggest challenges was moving staff into new kinds of roles, I suppose. So I guess, thinking about, our curatorial colleagues, putting them in the position of, presenting an Instagram live and all of the kind of accoutrements that are attached to that. So I think there is definitely, or has been, a huge enthusiasm to embrace technology, to find new ways to communicate or program. But actually, these are kind of different models to the ones we're used to. So we're not doing a kind of talk within an auditorium. We're using a technology and an interface to be able to do something different. And certainly with the kind of artist drop-ins, we've been working with artists that don't even have Instagram, and a kind of Instagram account is kind of a basic requirement to be able to host that conversation. So I think those things, kind of small, like technical things, have actually been the most interesting in terms of kind of moving quickly and responding quickly. So
operations, we love that.
It's kind of like operations, but
yeah.
I think certainly as we move into, accepting that the physical museum and the virtual museum are going to exist side by side for quite some time, I think there's a recognition that our jobs are going to change and we're going to have to respond to that. So I think people are generally excited. I just wanted to share, this is one of the first things we did during lockdown, and this was with the artist Louise Lawler, who released these tracings for download that anyone, kind of families, could download them and color them in. And we got a great response. This is one of the first things that we did. And actually, it was Louise got in contact with us to say, wouldn't it be great too? And we said, yes, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea. And we got some great, as you can see on the right-hand side, we got some amazing responses. And as we talked about, I guess we moved back into the museum at the end of August. And obviously, I think what I'm sharing on screen is probably familiar to everyone in terms of some of the protocols that we've implemented. So this was just creatively, we worked with an illustrator called Nicholas Bernard here, just to create MoMA's version of 100,000 versions of these that you've seen before, but really communicating kind of a new way in which people are now experiencing the physical museum. And what's, I think, been quite interesting for us is, when we opened last year, I think we would probably say now that we didn't go far enough in terms of some of the digital interfaces. And I think we still had kind of physical print in the space. And it's amazing kind of how quickly we've moved to kind of, a visitor guide that is only available on your own smartphone, a map that's only available on smartphone, audio that you have to use your smartphone for. So I think kind of COVID has obviously impacted on kind of how we use our digital platforms in a kind of broadcast way internationally, but also how we kind of think about kind of the physical experience of coming into the museum. So we create, this just shows you that really. We created all of this beautiful print that we adored when we opened. Isn't it gorgeous? And very quickly it moved, within a few months, we recreated that map on people, so people could use it on their phones.
Suddenly when survival relies on it, you feel that digital kind of, can really come back quite quickly and you're able to adapt. It's just that there isn't another option. So.
I think you kind of, and probably this is true of audiences as well, you kind of need something like a real prompt for change. Yeah. And I'll show you just a funny image. This is as you go into the museum. This is our program wall, which tells visitors kind of where they go and various different parts of the building. And we are promoting our new visitor guide. And it's the rebirth of the QR code, which we think is hilarious. Like we thought, who is using QR codes? And I think generally the design community find them quite ugly.
More than the design community, I think.
Yeah, I think probably everyone finds them quite ugly. But, you can't, I don't know whether it's the same kind of wherever anyone else is in Europe, but, you go to a restaurant and you can't actually get a physical menu. You have to use a QR code to see the menu. So it's quite amazing just how I think people have just adapted to just a new way of working. It's like, well, of course you don't have a physical map. Of course I'm going to have to take a photo of a QR code and get it on my phone.
And what was this kind of journey in terms of it making it normal? I think that everyone and over the world, I think there was a different adaptation phase where it's a learning for humanity in some way, where you realize, does it take 2-3 months for people to adapt to that? At which point do visitors come in? I think when you reopened, everyone was kind of used to that process by then, but there was a bit of an education phase where no one really knew how to act and behave and respond to all these changes. And, totally. We are accepting it now, but, what was this kind of little buffer phase that you needed to reopen and feel comfortable?
Totally. Well, when we reopened, we set up, we have all of this kind of technology in the lobby of MoMA, so we have this machine that will automatically read your temperature. We have a kind of a bag check, which is you don't need to touch the bags to see what's in the bag. And we were kind of quite nervous around how visitors would understand this and respond to this. And I remember the first day that we reopened, and there was like loads of MoMA staff. We were obviously all social distancing, but quite a lot of MoMA staff waiting for this first visitor to come in.
The poor visitor.
I know. It's just
what an entry.
It reminded me of like back in the day when they used to re-release it or release an Apple product in an Apple store, and all the staff would be there cheering. And actually the people came in and it was like they were just programmed to know how to do it. There was no ambiguity. I stand here, I wait for this, I move through, here's my digital ticket. And it was like, we obviously communicated in advance how you do it, but it was kind of gratifying to see that kind of visitors just knew and kind of took it in their stride and accepted, very willingly accepted the restrictions and were grateful that we were taking kind of care of them and thinking about their safety. So that was really great.
That's great to hear.
I think that's actually the end of my slides, Emma.
Is it? Oh, because I had plenty of questions, but I didn't want to interrupt.
No, jump in.
I know. I'm glad we went down to the reopening and some good news as well for all of you. And I think as the chat has been talking in the meantime, and a lot of the viewers are saying that they just can't get beyond experiencing art in real life, and that's something that's undeniable. So it is a really interesting time, and I think it has thrown so many industries who rely on physical experiences to this new space. If we think of travel as well, and Airbnb, I'm always kind of interested in seeing what they're doing at the moment to bounce back. But at the same time, my main question is, how do you compete now in this digital space? I was thinking of Artsy, for example, who always had this business model of being online and allowing for galleries or artists to connect. So what does competition look like in the digital space? How do you stand out and make yourself known? And the MoMA is known, but how do you make your experience different?
That's a really good question, and I don't know that we have a complete answer for it yet. I think we are. I think whether it's in a digital space or in a physical space, I think we have to do things that kind of link to our institutional mission to share kind of the art of our time and to connect audiences with artists. And I think everything we've done to date, I think, delivers on that as a mission. But we are certainly grappling with kind of how we think about our business model, I guess, as an institution as well. We are kind of we have been primarily a physical space. So I think understanding kind of how we can exist in terms of having a really extensive content program and how that is sustainable for us. I think I agree with the comments in the chat. I think we see the physical encounter with art as critical and important, and I think that's why I think we were praying to open as soon as we possibly could to allow audiences to have that. So I think in terms of kind of competing, I think we certainly as an institution, specifically MoMA, I think we're well placed in terms of our, I guess, profile as an institution and our digital reach to take advantage of that in this moment. But I think thinking very carefully around the kind of content that we introduce, kind of which platforms we present our program on. We're very proud of working on kind of third-party platforms like social media, Instagram, Facebook, to be able to share our program. But yeah, it's a question that we are thinking about now and thinking about what that future looks like. But a recognition, as I said before, that we know that we will be existing kind of in parallel forever now, probably. That is just the way that this will be. And as you said, it's an opportunity to continue that engagement with audiences that don't come to or may never come to New York.
And I really like that you were also talking. I think a lot of us have gotten to this stage where we accepted that the future will look like a really good hybrid of both this digital and this physical world. And Sophia in the chat, who's an amazing photographer based in Berlin, actually, is asking, how do you think 2020 has changed the way we experience art? So we kind of answered this question a little bit, but if you want to answer this again, will there be a shift from physical to digital art experiences also for museums? So I guess your answer was a little bit of both.
I think a bit of both, but I think my feeling, particularly when I see people come back into the galleries and their level of excitement to do that, I think the digital experience is enhancing and can provide a lot of value and enjoyment. But I think it will probably it will only encourage us further, I think, to want to be able to come into art galleries and museums to have that physical encounter. So in a way, I remember talking to my partner about the Neri Oxman show, and we watched the Q&A with Neri, and suddenly there was like this kind of complete enthusiasm to be able to go into the galleries and actually see the show. So I feel like, they'll exist in parallel. Both will offer value, but I think that thirst and that hunger to go in and have a physical encounter, I think, will remain, if not be stronger, actually.
You have such a positive kind of feedback on this experience, which is great to hear. What has been the response and the traction, actually, in all your visitors online on this new amount of content and the different channels and opportunities that you've created this year?
It's been really good. I think we kind of subscribe very much to a test and learn kind of model for the way in which we work. So I think there are things that we've seen really great responses to things like kind of curated recommendations. We have a short course program, which is led by our education team at MoMA, which is free. I think you can pay to have a certificate at the end of it. It's run off Coursera, but the response to that particularly during the first months of lockdown, was totally phenomenal. The amount of subscriptions to that was kind of exponential. So I think one of our learnings is that people like to learn about stuff. And I think probably at the beginning of lockdown, there was like this, what can I do in my time that is rewarding and fulfilling? And we just saw just a really amazing response to that. So I think we're getting kind of inklings from our audiences about what they like and actually what they'll respond to. And obviously we pay very close attention to analytics to actually see, what is resonating and what do people want to see. So it's an ongoing process, I guess, is my
That's interesting. Yeah, it was going to be my last point, actually, which is, this online world is also offering new opportunities to understand how audiences behave and, what visitors want to see. And it's opened, I guess, opportunities, but also risks and some concerns on which have always been there on, how much information we can get and data and what we might do with it as corporations or brands and in different industries. So, ultimately, what you're also saying, I guess, and what we're seeing is, we're able to provide better experiences and we're, it might be a little bit more personalized or create something new next year. If you had any thoughts on this, always happy to hear, but it's a really interesting time for us to also rethink how we're using that data and might create something next year.
Yes. I totally agree. I think continuing to kind of refine the user experience of what we do and refine the content in what we do, whether it's a digital or physical experience. At the moment, we've kind of been forced into changing the experience of what we do for visitors through a global pandemic. But I think learning, and even now, just observing visitors and how they experience the museum, there are learnings to be had in terms of how, for example, we have a really extensive audio program, which we know adds value to visitors when they come into the museum. We don't have devices. How do we encourage visitors to experience that? Because we know that it will add value to them. So we're always thinking about kind of new ways to improve that, but the data will certainly inform it, no question.
Brilliant. I think we're at time, actually. So we've covered quite a lot with your whole journey, all the way from, London to now at the moment. So that's been really great to see. And everyone's really excited in the chat. I hope some of you at home will be able to sign up to some of these programs and sessions and also follow, MoMA on Instagram, because I think there's a lot of content on there. I was having a look before. Any final words from you, Rob, before we let you off?
No, it's great to talk, Emma, and it's great to share some of the things we've been doing. But as I said, this is a huge learning year for everyone. So this has been our experience of it, but there's lots of different ways to cut it. But very exciting. Thank you.
Looking forward to what you have in store next year. And thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you again for another session next month.